Does inclusion matter in comic books? Does it matter that a character looks like you? Does it matter if a character comes from the same location as you? Find out my thoughts on this week of Talking Comics. What is up, everybody? Patrick Hickey Jr. here, Editor-in-Chief of Legacy Comics, here for another issue, another episode of Talking Comics. This week we're going to be talking about something that people have been talking about for quite some time in comics, easily over the past 20 years, and it's inclusion. It's the thought that there should be more characters of different genders, religion, race, all sorts of things included in comics. We've got one side of people that, are all about like having characters and as many different ways and shapes of life as possible, and then we've got another group of people that don't want that feel like that stuff doesn't matter, and they don't like seeing their characters, their traditional characters, the ones that they've grown up loving, changed in any way, shape, or form, or any characters connected to their canon changed in any way, shape, or form. And I'm going to give my thoughts on that. If you guys don't know who I am, again, Patrick Hickey Jr., Editor-in-Chief of Legacy Comics. I've got over 17 years of publishing experience, former NBC editor. I've contributed to the New York Times. I've contributed to the New York Daily News. I have 7 books published on video game history that are in over 1,000 libraries worldwide. I'm also a voice actor in video games, and I've been doing this comic book thing for a couple of years now, so that, in a nutshell, is me. I grew up a comic book fan. I have loved comics for as long as I could possibly remember. I've been reading comics actively since, I would say, 1990. So I remember the Todd McFarlane #1 Spider-Man. I remember the X-Force and New Mutants with Robbie Liefeld. There's so much crazy stuff. I remember when variants were a new thing. I remember the polybags and the collectible cards inside. And I remember the origin of Image Comics. And I remember so many great things. It's one of the reasons why, despite all of my success in journalism and in writing video game history books, that I decided to get involved in the comic book industry. So my thoughts on inclusion are interesting. I don't want to say they're different. I don't think they're very different. But I will say that growing up for a very long time, I never thought about inclusion in comic books. I just thought, is this character cool? And growing up, I had favorite characters, and they were Wolverine and Spider-Man probably being my 2 favorite, and Batman being a close third, and these were 3 white guys. And it wasn't until I read more that I started to appreciate Elektra, and I started to appreciate Wonder Woman, and I started to appreciate female characters. And it wasn't in Psylocke. Oh my god, I love Psylocke. I love her design. I just love everything about her. I just think she's just this amazing, badass character. But then also, too, I always appreciated cool characters. Characters that I didn't see as often as I would like, but characters that I appreciated. So like Blade, Luke Cage, 2 characters that I love now, and I can see plenty of them whenever I want because they're literally all over the place. The collected trades and omnibuses are all over the place. Luke Cage's Netflix series is still one of my favorite Marvel series of all time. But as a kid in the early 90s, Power Man had kind of lost his way, his mystique. They had tried to reboot it several times, and the tiara didn't carry over too well into the 90s. 90s, we're talking Ice-T and Ice Cube and Boys in the Hood and badasses and stuff, and that was what I wanted to see from an African American character. But instead I had this kind of 60s, 70s tiara dude, and I couldn't connect with it. Blade, on the other hand, was just completely badass, and I totally connected with that character. But anyway, like I said, as a kid, Didn't care about the color of the skin of the character. Didn't care if it was a dude or a gal. Didn't care about their sexuality because their sexuality wasn't discussed. You know, like, we've had plenty of characters come out, so to speak, over the last couple of years. We've even had, like, it was in the news a couple of months ago where we're talking about Batman and Catwoman's sex life. And when I was a kid reading comic books, that stuff was never even thought of. That was just like a bunch of guys hanging out, like, after a hockey game or playing video games, like, dude, what do you think, like, Batman and Catwoman would do, like, in the sack? Like, you think Batman would be like... And that would be the conversation, but it would never be actively discussed in the comic book. And for me, that was okay. I didn't need to know every single thing about the character. I didn't need to know about Tim Drake's sexuality. I didn't need to know about Batman and Catwoman's sex life. I didn't need to know about Clark and Lois's son and his sexual identity. I didn't need to know any of that stuff. I didn't need to know about Iceman. I didn't need to know about Shatterstar. I wanted to see some kick-ass action. I wanted to see some fights. I wanted to see some really fun stories. I read comics as a kid to escape, like, a lower middle class upbringing where it was just ho-hum boring every single day, you know? And for me to imagine that I was Spider-Man, or imagine that I was Darkhawk, or imagine that I was Ghost Rider, was just, like, really cool to me, you know? I could imagine myself as those characters, despite the fact that, like, I didn't look exactly like them. So for people that don't know, I'm like 6'4". I'm blonde hair, blue eyed. I'm like an Aryan poster boy, not by choice. It's just the way it happened. That's DNA for you. So when I was a kid, Steve Rogers. I look like Steve Rogers a little bit. Blonde hair, blue eyes, big dude. But I never really, like, connected with Captain America that much. I like the character, but he's too, like, Boy Scout for me. He's too good. You know, I later really got into Captain America later in life. Steve Englehart, Roger Stern, John Byrne, Captain America. I remember, I think it was a 1992 50th anniversary Captain America annual Jim Lee cover. I own it. They had a couple like really cool stories in there that really latched me onto the character, but it was just like, it was cool that Captain America looked like me, but it didn't make me like him that much more. So again, inclusion was never like a thing for me because I didn't care about characters like that. Like, I didn't care what they look like. If they were cool, I like them. But our world has changed in an incredible amount over the last 20 years. People read comics and want more. They want more than bing, bam, boom. You know, comics like The Walking Dead changed comics forever, where it was more of a study of people and how people respond to trauma. So as much as people think that The Walking Dead is a comic about zombies, it's anything but. You know, it's more spaghetti western than it is zombie, but it's also an intense character study of people of all of different shapes and sizes have to kind of band together to defeat this force. But it's just like, you find out a lot about them. You find out about their sexuality. You find out a lot about who they are as people. And Robert Kirkman's a genius, because Robert Kirkman understood that in order to make a comic like this work with no superheroes, you really had to dig deep into all of the characters. So you have, you know, African American characters, white characters, Hispanic characters, Asian characters. I mean, let's be honest here. You know, there's like a tremendous lack of like Hispanic and African American characters in comics, but we're talking Asian characters. There's not nearly enough Asian characters in comic books, you know? So, I mean, Kirkman throws all of these archetypes, all of these different types of people at us in The Walking Dead. You want to talk about a comic that is all about inclusion, men, women, young, old, all different shapes and sizes. Like, that comic that series is a slice of life. That comic is done beautifully, amazingly. So, but it does it. The thing is, The Walking Dead does it naturally. And over the past like 15, 20 years, Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse, Boom, Valiant, they've all tried in their own way to throw characters that look different than our average person, or throw characters like where the first thing that you read in the catchline is their sexual identity or where they come from. And I'm also the editor-in-chief of ReviewFix.com. I've been the editor-in-chief of that website and the owner of that website for close to 15 years. And I get pitches from those comic book companies every day. Check out our new book. Oh, it's about a transsexual this, or the word that is used a lot is queer. And I have to be brutally honest, that's not a deal breaker for me. It doesn't make me not want to read the book, but it doesn't make me want to read the book either, because I personally want to read the book and find that out for myself. I feel like if that stuff is just thrown out like right in the beginning, they're trying to attract a certain type of audience, people that normally wouldn't read comics and want to be represented by these comics, which is fine. I want to see new readers. I want to connect with people of all different ages, shapes, and sizes and be like, you know what? I didn't read comics, but then I saw this character and I'm like, oh my God, it's like me. I want to have conversations with people like that. So again, that stuff doesn't bother me. It pisses off a ton of people. The whole Comicsgate community, they're not happy about stuff like that. And for me, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me at all. Can I read, being a heterosexual white male, can I read stories about transsexual characters, gay characters, lesbian characters? Sure. Absolutely. Do I enjoy them? Absolutely. If the character is unique and well written and the art is slamming, I'm in. I am in. Despite the fact that I'm completely different from this character, I am in. I am invested. I want to read it. So it's just like when you have all of these things come out in the news that Superman's son who takes up the mantle is openly gay, and people are like, oh my God, that was like the collective thing. Oh my God. I'm like, okay, it's not my Superman. And people are like, what do you mean it's not your Superman? Clark Kent is my Superman. That's the Superman that I grew up with. This is a Superman for a new generation. He is Superman now. I will read those comics and fully acknowledge him as Superman. But for me, growing up, Clark Kent will always be Superman. And this is like Superman 2, which is fine. But this is like what DC has done this throughout their entire history. They've done it with pretty much every character except for Superman and Batman, despite the fact that there have been plenty of other people that have donned the Batman cowl over the years. Then we have situations where characters, we just discussed the sexuality thing in comics. So now we're going to discuss religion. And for me, some of my favorite characters in comics, I said them before, but I forgot one. Daredevil. Daredevil has a massive religious footprint in his history. And he's always kind of coming to grips with the type of person he is and the things that he's done. And he spends a lot of time in churches, which makes for some beautiful goddamn art. No pun intended. Sorry for the goddamn. But, man, I gotta tell you, one of my daughter's favorite characters is Kamala Khan. She's 5. My daughter's 5, not Kamala Khan. Kamala Khan's older than 5. My daughter's 5, and she loves Kamala Khan. And the reason why she loves her is because I got the Avengers game on PlayStation 4, and she watched all of the cutscenes in the game as I was playing, and she saw a young girl that loved the Avengers that was discovering herself and discovering the fact that she had superpowers. My daughter did not care that she was Muslim. Did not care. And for me, it's that's proof that I'm raising her right. And I love Kamala Khan. I think Kamala Khan is an awesome character because, again, it invokes that Ditko Lee Spider-Man, a teenager finding themselves. And in this case, she happens to be Muslim, or the same way that Iceman happens to be gay. It's like all of that stuff doesn't matter to me. However, like I said before, I do understand that like people that happen to have this need to be represented attach themselves to these characters, which is great. And see, this is the thing though too. It's happened to me. I've attached myself to characters that look like me. I just told you a little while ago that I didn't connect with Captain America because of his personality. But I will tell you, the first time I read Scarlet Spider and Ben Reilly took his mask off and I saw that he had blonde hair, I went, oh my god. Because I am one of the biggest Spider-Man fans ever. I love Spider-Man. I love, like, from Superior Spider-Man to J. Michael Straczynski Spider-Man to Mark Bagley Spider-Man to Steve Ditko Spider-Man to Todd McFarlane Spider-Man. Like, I'm all in. Ultimate Spider-Man. I've read a ton of Ultimate Spider-Man. I've read, like, easily, I would say probably, like, the first 400 issues of Amazing Spider-Man, and then sprinkled in throughout the rest. And like I always, whenever there's a special issue, I'll pick it up and things like that. But that Clone Saga for me hit hard because it was at a certain age. I believe it was like it had to have been in between 97 and 99, I'm pretty sure, the Clone Saga. Maybe a little before, maybe 96. But anyway, I remember reading those comics and being so obsessed with the fact that there was a clone and that the clone was the actual real Spider-Man. I thought it was just so cool. And I know that crossover, that event didn't sell as well as Marvel would have hoped, and some people look down on it, but I love the Scarlet Spider's design, and I love the fact that he had this like Backstreet Boys haircut with the part down the middle, because that was the same exact haircut I had when I was like 16, 17 years old. So that was the first time I was kind of like, I like this character more than Peter Parker. And some of my friends were like, you like him more just because you look like him. And I'm like, yeah, I do. It was crazy. So it's like now I understood after that why inclusion mattered so much. I understand why people that don't read comics will jump into a comic because they like Luke Cage and because they feel like he represents them, or Miles Morales, or Kamala Khan. And I just feel like at the end of the day, if we just kind of push away our Republican card or our Democrat card or our conservative card and our liberal card and our independent card and our pro this and our anti that, and we just look at characters and we make the choice and say, is this a good character? Is this a character that could stand on its own 2 feet despite like the way it looks or some other like personal bio? Are these stories about characters that are engaging regardless of like the way they look and where they may come from and stuff? And if the answer is yes, then it's a win. Then it's totally a win. And it's just like, if you can't read a comic about a character that is from a different place than you and enjoy it just for the experience, then you're probably the problem, and not Marvel and not DC and not any of these other comic book companies. It's like we're just in a weird time where people are easily offended, and people are scared. People are scared to say how they really feel, because I mean there is a lot of pent up racism out there, and there's a lot of people that will make snap judgments about people, and nobody wants to get in a flame war on Twitter or anything like that. And it's just like, I remember because Sarita, Condry's sidekick in my series, Condry happens to be an African American woman, and I remember the editor-in-chief and owner of lesser known comics, Mark Burnell, where I started the Condry series, he was like, you should just be really careful writing African American female characters. And I was like, excuse me? And he's like, you should just be careful. Like, is that the way, like, you think an African American woman speaks and stuff? And I said, she called him sugar. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I went to William E. Grady High School in Brooklyn, New York. I'm a product of the City University of New York. I have plenty of African American friends. I know plenty of elderly African American women, and I have been called sugar by African American women before. Like, it was such like a small thing to me. I'm just like, wait, so you're upset that she called him sugar? And he was just basically, well, I don't want to piss anybody off and blah, blah, blah. And I just feel like if you're going to write about characters that look different than you, that's completely okay. It's fiction. However, the best fiction is about suspending disbelief. It's about making those characters feel real. So in order to make those characters feel as real as possible, you have to have some type of connection to the culture. You have to understand the culture. If you don't, then you've got to do your research. And you've got to make people that see a little bit of themselves see a little bit of themselves in that character. You have to make them feel comfortable. And the thing is, though, you have to make them feel like it's not fake. I remember, I've told this story before on other podcasts, but I'll tell it again. I was producing a interview with Chris Claremont. If you're into comics and you don't know who Chris Claremont is, one Google search will solve that problem. He's arguably like one of the greatest comic book writers of all time. He is arguably, my Grant Morrison fans may disagree, but he is the best writer in X-Men history. So much great stuff from him. So I'm producing an interview with Chris Claremont, and my interviewer is interviewing him, and I'm running the camera and making sure the audio sounds good. And I forgot what the question was, but it was just a question about the relationship between Scott Summers, Jean Grey, and Wolverine. Chris Claremont never said Wolverine. He never said Cyclops, and he never said Jean Grey. He said Scott, Jean, and Logan. And I remember this was probably around 2009. So I had written Condry, I would say probably like 6 or 7 years before then, but I couldn't find an artist. So I was just focusing mainly on my journalism, and I wasn't the fiction writer that I would later become. I didn't have that comic book sensibility of thinking that I needed to have. I was just like all in on being a sports writer, being an entertainment writer, being a journalist. And when he referred to those characters by their first names, I was like, there's something wrong with this guy. These are not real characters. Why is he speaking as if they're real characters? And now, man, like 13 years later, I know why Chris Claremont is one of the greatest comic book writers of all time. Because to him, those characters are real. The same way I feel about my characters. Like, if you put them in any situation, I can provide dialogue, like, right away. If you give me a situation, I can script out a page for Dan Dero and Bev Dero and Sarita and Condry and Kroom and, all of the characters that, I've created in the Legacy, comics, like, catalog. So the thing is, it's just like, when you hear, like, a professor say, like, whenever they do these interviews with, GQ or Rolling Stone or this place or that place, and they're talking about inclusion in comics, and an academic will go on this big thing, and it's just like, you have to do the research, and some people feel like, you shouldn't write a character that you're not connected with in any way. But the thing is, you've got to make it feel real, and you've got to talk to people. You've got to talk to people that are similar in scope and place of life and things like that. And like for me, it's just like, there's a scene in Condry, one where Sarita is walking by herself and she's talking to her dead husband, and she's just updating him on his life. In order for myself to prepare myself to write that, I took a walk late at night, and I spoke to my mom, who passed away a couple of years ago. And I just let myself go. I just let myself have that conversation. So despite the fact that I don't look anything like Sarita, that conversation was about, like, updating someone who isn't here anymore about how you feel about life. And anyone that's read Condry 1 knows that that's like a pretty special page. And that it reads authentic and it reads real because it's based on something real. Something real that I experienced, And I just kind of like almost transplanted that to Sarita, but then I added some other like little sensibilities. You know, she's a woman, I'm a male. You know, she has an older son, I have a young son and a young daughter. But it's the same thing. To me, it's the same thing at the end of the day. It's somebody talking to someone that's no longer here, that they miss and that they still love. And I think that's what makes a great comic book, an emotional connection. And when we start picking stuff apart and being like, well, this character is this character is that, we're taking away from the biggest point of comics. And it's to tell great stories that make us feel. Bad characters, regardless of their color, the color of their skin, their race, their gender, their identity, they don't make us feel. They're passable. And it's happened before, where a character was created solely to try and connect to a certain type of person, and the character is rejected because that community doesn't feel the connection. So my whole thing is like, my final thoughts on inclusion is that in order to write as inclusively as possible, you have to be as well-rounded a person as possible. And you have to be as honest with yourself as possible. And sometimes being honest with yourself means that you don't know everything about everyone, and you have to go and do your research. It's no different to me than writing about a comic that takes place at another time and in another place. If you're writing about 1970 St. Louis, you better do your research, because someone will call you out on it. The same way if you're writing about the inner city of Brooklyn, of New York City, and you don't know the people that inhabit that place, and you don't know the way they speak and the way they act, you're in deep trouble. So if you can do that, inclusion is never a problem.